One of the greatest historical cities of India was Kanchipuram. It was close to the busy port of Mamallapuram and was the capital city of many kings over the centuries. Kanchipuram is one of the 7 most holy cities for Hindus in India. It is mentioned by the Sanskrit poet Kalidasa of the 5th century as one of the greatest cities in the country. It was visited in the 7th century by the Chinese pilgrim scholar Xuanzang. Many famous Buddhist philosophers and thinkers were born here, including Bodhidharma, who introduced Zen Buddhism in China at the Shaolin Temple in the 6th century.
The Pala river actually comes from Andhra and it goes through Kanchipuram till it meets the sea at Mamallapuram. So ships would dock at Mamallapuram and then many of them could come up, the smaller ones definitely could have come up all the way to Kanchipuram, since it is also referred to as being on the river. Of course, the Pala today has silted up. We have Roman amphorae, we found Roman coins, so we know the Romans did trade with this area. Definitely Southeast Asia, because if the ships went out there, and Pallava Grantha is still used in many of the scripts of Southeast Asia. Cambodian, for example, is still written in Pallava Grantha. So they definitely would have come here too, because this region was a kind of a retrading center. You know, a lot of spices came from Southeast Asia. The Romans came and bought the spices. The Romans came and bought cotton, because Kanchipuram was a major cotton weaving center. Silk comes much later.
Of course, Roman coin findings and Roman amphora and other things findings are not new to this what you call Tamil country, especially in the East Coast. In fact, this, when Mortimer Wheeler excavated Sarikamed in 1946. That was taken as one of the extensive Roman contact place or Roman trade place or Roman commercial place in India, that is, which was comparable with any other great site of in the entire world. So we are finding these hundreds of Roman gold coins in hoards. Interestingly, we know that around about 50 or 58 AD, there was a resolution in the Roman rather parliament that the government, that means the king should not, the emperor should not waste money or rather the gold just for the luxury of getting the materials from India.
Kanchipuram was one of the greatest centers for the study of Sanskrit, Pali and Tamil. Today, it is known as a city of 1,000 temples. It is also famous for the wonderful silk saris which are produced here.
Kanchi was probably chosen as the capital by the Pallavas because it was a center of cotton weaving. Now, cotton has been the biggest trade item in ancient South India, Tamil Nadu. Somewhere along this period, the mulberry tree was introduced, and in literature it's mentioned that it came from Sinnam, that is China. The introduction of silk from China, which is important because it means that there was a continuous trade with China, and I think that's something we should remember. Don't forget, Hyun Sang has come all the way down to Kanchipuram in the 7th century and written about it, and written about the stupa, Ashokan stupa that he saw, and so on. So obviously Chinese were coming all this way, because it's interesting that it was the 7th century when both sugar, which is called chini, and silk, which is called chinnam or sinnam, came from China. The cotton, of course, came from further north, from the Deccan. It was brought here, and the weavers developed this very fine art of weaving the Kanchipuram cotton sari.
The Pallava king Narasimhavarman II, also known as Rajasimha, ruled in the first quarter of the 8th century. He made the first structural temple in Tamil Nadu on the shores of the port town of Mamallapuram. 70 kilometers away from Mamallapuram is the city of Kanchipuram. King Rajasimha made the glorious Kailashnatha temple here for his personal worship. A foundation inscription states that he erected this great house of Shiva to reflect his own glory and the laughter of the Lord. The temple is dedicated to Shiva Gangadhara, the bearer of the river Ganga.
The shore temple on the Bay of Bengal is really quite a simple event. It's two very small linga sanctuaries placed slightly at a diagonal, each with a towered pyramid rising above. But it's not a very clearly planned, I would say, monument. Nonetheless, it's extremely beautiful and delicately modelled. But the moment we go to Kanchipuram, now we're well into the 8th century, with Rajasimha, the most important king at that time, we see with the Kailasnath temple there, a very well-planned monument. It is contained in a rectangle of walls, and the walls have tiny little shrines set into them. And in the middle of the paved compound is the main temple itself. This consists of a linga sanctuary with a tower, a pyramidal tower above, and the sides of the sanctuary have these deep niches. They're almost like shrines in themselves, in which different aspects of Shiva are portrayed. The problem with this temple is that it was built not in granite, but in a type of sandstone that was not very strong. So many of the sculptures have become very poorly worn, and they were on many occasions covered with plaster. The plaster has now been taken off, and now we can appreciate better some of the original types of sculptural devices.
The temple's foundation inscription likens the ruler's descent from King Parameshvara with that of Skanda from Lord Shiva. The deity in the temple, and by implication the temple itself, was named Rajasimha Pallaveshvara, or the Lord of Rajasimha Pallava. This practice was to become popular in all later South Indian temples. The temple also has the name Kailashnatha, or Shiva, the Lord of Mount Kailasha. Just inside the main entrance on the east is a smaller shrine built by the king's son Mahendravarman III. Unlike the main shrine, this has a barrel-shaped roof. There is a row of smaller shrines in front of the temple. Inscriptions show that at least 2 of them were made by queens. A mandapa with a Nandi inside stands at a considerable distance from the temple. The entire complex of this royal temple is grand and lavishly sculpted. Rampant lions, a royal symbol of the Pallavas, are made everywhere. They display the vigor and courage of the spirit within us to fight the demons of our ignorance. They also display the glory of the Pallava king who made the temple. As the worshipper moves on the outer ambulatory path, shrines are made here. These prepare him and begin the journey, the transport of delight, away from the confusions and anxieties of the material world. The shrines made in the outer walls of the sanctum house large images of Shiva. These are among the finest and most elegant ever made in India. We see images of Shiva's cosmic dance, the Tandava. This was a favorite theme with Rajasimha. The dynamism of the dance is expressed in the many arms of Shiva which move around him. The bent knees express the power of his rhythmic leap upwards. Besides the Shiva Linga, the shrines of the temple have the image of Somaskanda. In Rajasimha's time, this icon was constantly made in the sanctums of temples. The Somaskanda shows Shiva with Parvati as Uma and their son Skanda or Kartikeya. The Lord and his spouse are presented as universal parents. A parallel is drawn between the divine family and that of the king. The sculpted figures on the temple walls breathe with the inspired workmanship of the artist. A shrine portrays Shiva as the enchanting mendicant. Around him are the enamored wives of rishis. We see Shiva as Tripurantaka when he destroys the forts of the demons. This was an icon which was to become very popular with the Cholas who succeeded the Pallavas in this region. Durga as Mahishasur Mardini is one of the most expressive images of Indian art. Durga personifies the energy and power within us to face and to destroy the demon of our ignorance. The grace with which she is made complements her vigor and the dynamic theme of the composition. The mandapa or hall of the temple was originally a detached structure and is today connected by a 16th century construction. The enclosing wall of the temple complex has a series of small cells which face east and west. The outer niches have sculpted images of deities. Deep within the inner niches are paintings of Lord Shiva in his various forms. These are valuable as they are among the very few remains of the beautiful paintings of Pallava times. It is in these niches that some exquisite paintings of the 7th century still survive. These are among the earliest paintings of the Hindu tradition to be found anywhere in India. With the royal patronage of Pallava temples, here we see a change in the style of Indian painting. Whereas ancient paintings had focused entirely upon a simplicity and sense of grace, here for the first time we begin to see a sense of royal grandeur which comes into the art. Fragments of paint on the sculptures reveal that they would once all have been covered with a layer of plaster and painted. There is a panel of Ganas only 30 inches in height which runs along the base of the temple. It displays the high quality of carving everywhere in the temple. Ganas are an important motif in Shiva temples and they depict the joyous spirit of the worship of the Lord. This gorgeously sculpted temple presents the essential features of the style of South Indian temples which were to follow. The early Western Chalukyan king Vikramaditya II ruled in Karnataka in the second quarter of the 8th century. He had vowed to destroy the Kailashnath temple at Kanchipuram to avenge the earlier defeat of the Chalukyans when Vatapi, their capital, was sacked. However, when he did capture Kanchipuram, he was so overwhelmed by the beauty of this temple that he left it untouched. In fact, it is quite likely that later Chalukyan monuments, such as the Virupaksh temple at Pattadakal, were largely influenced by the style of this temple. The Vaikuntha Perumal temple, dedicated to Vishnu, was made at Kanchipuram in the second half of the 8th century by King Nandivarman II. The Vimana or tower is taller than that of the Kailashnath temple. The enclosure wall of the temple has on its inside a pillared gallery with sculpted reliefs. Some of these have labels and depict the history and glory of the Pallavas, the first such historical account of kings in Indian art.
This is an extremely well-planned monument. It is also contained in a rectangle of walls, and here the walls are completely covered with continuous reliefs. And these reliefs have mythological scenes to do with the mythology of Vishnu, but they also have scenes to do with everyday life. They probably represent campaigns and actions to do with the Pallava kings. In the middle of the compound, it's not a very large compound, is this very tall temple surmounted by the regular pyramidal roof. What is so interesting about this temple, it consists of 3 sanctuaries, one superimposed on the other, for seated, standing and reclining Vishnu. Only the priests had access to these sanctuaries. Royal worshippers probably didn't proceed beyond the lowest sanctuary.
Near Kanchipuram is the township now called Chinna Kanchipuram, which means Little Kanchipuram. In the old days, this may have been Jaina Kanchipuram, which has become Chinna Kanchipuram now. For the Vaishnava and Jaina establishments would have been here, while the Shaivite and Buddhist establishments were in the main city of Kanchipuram today. Indeed, Kanchipuram was also a great center of Jaina learning in ancient times.
I think a lot of civilization, South Indian civilization, has started in this area because in Kanchipuram, we know that Ashoka had built a stupa over here. And the fact that so many people came from different parts of the world to trade means that there was a booming economy. And interestingly, although the Palar has gone, if you take the ancient route of the Palar, which can still be seen from the geological survey maps, you can see the old course of the Palar river, and along that old course are so many Pallava temples. So that means the entire region between Mamallapuram and Kanchipuram was a very well settled area. One thing very important in this area is that agriculture really took off. The Pallavas also built, I don't know how many tanks, artificial irrigation tanks, and I know that about 93 of them were all interconnected, so that the overflow from one went to another. This was a very big center of Buddhism, Jainism, Vaishnavism and Shaivism. So I think Kanchi's importance in the history of Tamil Nadu and probably even of South India is as a center of religious development, because they had entire monasteries and very strong cult followings over here. As you know, most towns in India start around a Devi temple, and the main goddess, the local goddess, was Kamakshi, whose name means eyes of love. It is said that Adi Shankara came here and he saw this very Ugra Kamakshi, and he made her into a very Shanta Kamakshi, who is the presiding deity of Kanchipuram. And Kamakshi is so important that even deities like Varadarajar, Kamakshi is the spouse of Shiva, but the annual Varadaraja Perumal temple festival goes round the temple of Kamakshi. Adi Shankara also established mathas all over India. The 4 main ones are Badri, Dwarkapit, Jagannath Puri and Sringeri. But then he made a Peetham in Kanchipuram, and after his time there has been continuity of Shankaracharyas, who have had a very major role in the history of the development of Hinduism in this region. Also belonging to Kanchipuram was another very great saint, Ramanuja of the Vaishnavas. The city probably has more temples than any other city or town in India. Now the rituals in these temples are very, very conservative, orthodox, traditional. It is as per the Agamic scriptures. In fact, the construction of the temples themselves are strictly as per the Agamas. And some of the greatest tapatis lived in this region. In fact, temples built in the United States or anywhere else, they take a stapati from Kanchipuram even today to build the temple.